The Velen Dominion had conquered 17 civilizations. They moved through the galaxy like a dark wave, swallowing everything in their path. Their warships numbered in the millions. Their soldiers had never known defeat. Their emperor, a cruel being named Torok, sat on a throne made from the bones of fallen kings, when their long-range sensors found a small blue planet at the edge of a quiet solar system. They felt nothing but hunger. The planet was called Earth. Its people called themselves humans, and according to every scan, every report, and every piece of stolen data, these humans had no fleet. They had no allies. They had barely touched the stars. It would be the easiest conquest in Dominion history. Emperor Torak sent his demand across the void. Surrender, Neil. Become slaves or become ash. He gave the humans 7 days to decide. He expected their answer in 7 hours, far away. In the cold darkness of space, a single ship hung in orbit around Earth's moon. The ship was called the Horizon. It was not large. It was not beautiful. Its hull was gray and scarred from years of patrol duty. It carried a crew of 212 souls. It was the only warship humanity had ever built for deep space. Captain Park Tae stood on the bridge and watched the stars. He was 53 years old. His hair had gone gray at the temples, and his hands carried the scars of a dozen fights. He had served Earth for 30 years, first as a soldier, then as an officer, and now as the captain of humanity's last hope. Beside him stood Lieutenant Kim Yuna. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She had been top of her class at the academy. She had never seen real combat, but when she read the Dominion's message, her voice did not shake. 100,000 ships in their forward fleet, she said. They want our answer by midnight. Tae did not respond right away. He looked at the screen, at the endless darkness beyond, at the tiny dot of light that was Earth, his home, his world, everything he had ever loved. What is the Council saying? He asked why UNA pulled up the feed from Earth. The United Council had been in emergency session for 3 days. Leaders from every nation sat around a massive table, arguing, shouting, pleading. Some wanted to surrender. Some wanted to fight. Some wanted to run, but there was nowhere to run. They cannot agree, Yuna said. Half of them want to accept the Dominion's terms. The other half say we should resist. Tae watched the faces on the screen. He saw fear. He saw anger. He saw confusion. These were good people, doing their best in an impossible situation. They had built cities and cured diseases and sent ships to the moon, but nothing had prepared them for this. What do you think? He asked Yun. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I think surrender means death. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But the Dominion does not keep slaves forever. They use them until they break, and then they throw them away. Tae nodded slowly. He had read the reports. He knew what the Dominion did to conquered worlds. The labor camps. The experiments. The slow grinding of entire species into dust. Then we fight, he said, with one ship. With one ship, he opened a channel to the Council. His face appeared on screens across the planet, in homes and offices and shelters where people huddled in fear. This is Captain Park Tae of the Horizon, he said. I know you are afraid. I know you think we cannot win. But I want you to understand something. The Dominion has never faced a species like us. They have conquered worlds that gave up at the first sign of trouble. They have never met a people who would rather die than kneel. Paused, letting the words sink in. If we surrender, we will lose everything slowly. Our culture, our freedom, our children's future. But if we fight, we might lose quickly. Or we might do something no one has ever done before. We might show the galaxy that not every world will bow. The council chamber went silent. Every leader stared at the screen. I am taking the Horizon to meet the Dominion fleet, Tae continued. I am not asking for permission. I am telling you what will happen. And I am asking you to trust me. Trust that Earth's children do not surrender. Trust that we have always found a way to survive. Cut the feed. Yuna looked at him with wide eyes. Sir, that was probably the end of my career, Tay said with a small smile. But careers do not matter much when the world is ending. The Horizon's engines came to life. The ship began to move, leaving the moon behind, heading toward the darkness where the Dominion waited. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Beak-Su watched the power readings climb. He was a big man with gentle hands, and he loved his engines like children. He had spent 20 years keeping the Horizon running, and he would not let her fail now. On the weapons deck, Officer Choi Day checked the missile tubes one more time. His family had been soldiers for 3 generations. His grandfather had fought in the ground wars. His father had served on the orbital platforms, and now Day would carry that tradition to the stars. Captain Tay sat in his chair and watched the stars grow brighter. Behind him, Earth shrank to a tiny blue marble. Ahead, the largest war fleet in galactic history waited to crush them. He opened a channel to the Dominion flagship. "This is Captain Park Tay of Earth," he said. "We have received your demands. We have considered your terms." He took a breath. "We decline." The transmission ended. The Horizon flew on, and somewhere across the void, Emperor Torek felt something he had never felt before. It was small, just a tiny seed in the back of his mind. He did not recognize it, because he had never experienced it. It was doubt. The Velen had been watching Earth for 50 years. They had captured radio signals and television broadcasts. They had studied human languages and human customs. They had built a picture of this strange species that lived on the small blue world. What they saw made them laugh. The humans had spent their entire history fighting each other. They killed over land. They killed over ideas. They killed over the color of skin and the words in old books. They had invented weapons that could burn cities in seconds, and then they had pointed those weapons at each other. The Velen analysts wrote long reports about human weakness. They called the species primitive. They called them divided. They called them a threat to themselves, not to anyone else. What the analysts did not understand was the truth hidden inside those broadcasts. Navigator Lee Ho sat in the small chapel near the Horizon's bridge. He was not a religious man, but he liked the quiet. He liked to think. And right now, he was thinking about his grandfather. His grandfather had fought in the Pacific conflicts, back when nations still drew lines on maps and sent young men to die for them. He had survived 3 years in the jungle, eating insects and drinking rainwater. He had watched his friends die one by one, and when the war ended, he had walked home on broken feet and started a family. "You do not know what you can survive," his grandfather had told him once, "until you have no choice but to survive it." Understood now. The Velen saw human wars as proof of weakness. But those wars had done something else. They had taught humans how to endure, how to suffer, how to keep going when everything seemed lost. In the engine room, Beak-Su worked on a power coupling with steady hands. He had grown up in the ruins of the Sol reconstruction, back when half the city was still rubble from the energy wars. His mother had raised 4 children in a tour room, sheltered with no heat and no running water. She had never complained. Not once Sue remembered the day she had finally moved into a real apartment. She had stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the clean walls and the working lights. Then she had started crying. Not sad tears. Happy tears. The tears of someone who had walked through fire and come out the other side. That was what humans did. They suffered, and they survived, and they built again. On the weapons deck, Choi Day ran through targeting simulations. His family had been military for 3 generations. His grandfather had commanded ground troops in the border disputes. His father had served on the orbital defense platforms during the Mars Rebellion, and both of them had told him the same thing. The enemy always underestimates you. They look at your numbers and your weapons and your resources. They never look at your heart. The Dominion had millions of ships. They had conquered 17 civilizations, but they had never fought anyone who refused to give up. Every species they had faced had done the math, seen the impossible odds, and surrendered. Humans were bad at that kind of math. In the medical bay, Junhana reviewed everything they knew about Velen biology. She was a xenobiologist, trained to study alien life. She had spent her career looking at microbes and plants from distant worlds. She had never expected to study an enemy, but she was good at patterns. And she was starting to see something interesting. The Velen have never faced prolonged resistance, she said to Captain Tay in his ready room. Look at their conquest records. 11 days. That is the average. 11 days from first contact to total surrender. Tay leaned forward. What happens after 11 days? Nothing. The conquered species is absorbed into the Dominion. They become workers, or soldiers, or test subjects. The Velen move on to the next target, so they have never had to fight a long war. Never. Their entire military strategy is built on quick, overwhelming force. They hit hard, the enemy surrenders, and it is over. Hannah pulled up a chart. But look at their psychology profiles. The Velen believe in inevitability. They think the universe bends to the strong. They have never imagined a scenario where the weak refuse to break. Tay was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had found a crack in an enemy's armor. Then we give them something they have never seen, he said. An enemy that will not stop. The Horizon continued its journey toward the Dominion fleet. It would take 3 weeks to reach them, 3 weeks of cold space and quiet stars and waiting. The crew used that time to prepare. They ran combat drills until their fingers ached. They checked every system twice, then checked them again. They wrote letters to families back on Earth, knowing those letters might never be sent. Lieutenant Kang Jin spent hours in the simulator, practicing impossible maneuvers. He was the ship's pilot, responsible for keeping them alive when the shooting started. He had grown up racing hoverbikes through the canyons of New Arizona, and he had never lost a race in his life. If the Velen fly in formation, Yuna told him. Perfect lines. Perfect spacing. They've been doing it for 10,000 years. Jin grinned. Then they have never seen anyone fly dirty. Ensign Omina worked in the life support section, making sure the air stayed clean and the water kept flowing. She was 22 years old, the youngest member of the crew. Her mother had begged her not to go. Her father had cried at the spaceport, but she had gone anyway, because someone had to. Medic Shin Woo organized his supplies and checked his equipment. He was a quiet man who rarely smiled, but he had gentle hands and endless patience. He had worked in disaster zones on 3 continents before joining the space program. He knew how to keep people alive when everything was falling apart. "We're going to lose people," Captain Tay told him privately. "I need you to be ready," Wu nodded. "I have been ready my whole life." On the last night before contact, Tay walked through the ship. He visited every section, spoke to every crew member, shook every hand. He told them he was proud of them. He told them they were making history. He told them the truth. Some of them would not come home. No one asked to leave. No one asked to turn back. When Tay returned to the bridge, Yuna was waiting for him. "The fleet is on sensors," she said. 100,000 ships. They know we are coming. Tay looked at the screen. The Dominion Armada filled the void like a swarm of metal locusts. It was the largest military force ever assembled in the galaxy. And against it stood one small ship from a species that had barely learned to walk among the stars. He thought about his grandfather's words, about the walls of Sol, about the fires his people had walked through again and again for 1,000 generations. "Good," he said. "Let them watch us come." The horizon disappeared. One moment it was on every Dominion sensor screen, a single dot moving toward the great fleet. The next moment, it was gone, like a candle blown out by the wind. Admiral Vex stood on the command deck of the Dominion flagship and stared at empty space. He had served the Empire for 200 years. He had crushed rebellions and burned cities and watched entire species beg for mercy. He had never lost a target. "Find them," he said. His voice was cold and sharp. His officers worked their consoles. They scanned every frequency. They checked every shadow. They found nothing. The Velen had never needed stealth technology. Why would prey need to hide when capture was certain? Their ships were built for power, not for sneaking. Their sensors were designed to track large fleets, not single vessels, and they had never fought a species that had spent centuries learning. How to hide, Lieutenant Kong Jin guided the horizon through the gravity shadow of a gas giant. The planet was massive, a ball of swirling storms that bent light and scrambled sensors. The ship hugged its dark side like a spider in a corner, invisible and patient. Holding position, Jin reported. His hands moved across the controls with the ease of long practice. They cannot see us here. Captain Tay nodded. How long until the supply convoy? Lieutenant Yuna checked her data. 6 hours. 42 transport ships carrying fuel for 10,000 warships. They are taking the standard route through the Kepler system. The plan had come together during those long weeks of travel. The Dominion was big, but big things needed feeding. Their ships burned fuel at incredible rates. Their soldiers needed food and medicine. Their weapons needed parts and ammunition. Cut the supply lines, and even the largest army would starve. We hit them fast and hard, Tay said. No warning, no mercy. And then we disappear before they can respond. The crew knew their jobs. They had practiced this 100 times in simulation. But simulation was not real. In simulation, no one died. 6 hours passed slowly. The horizon waited in the dark, engines cold, lights dim. The crew sat at their stations and tried not to think about what was coming. Then Yuna spoke. Contact. 42 ships entering the system now. Jin's hands tightened on the controls. Ready? Tay took a breath. This was it. The moment when theory became reality. The moment when everything changed. Attack. The horizon burst from the shadow like a shark from deep water. Its engines flared bright, pushing the ship to speeds the Dominion had never seen from such a small vessel. Jin flew like he had been born in space, dodging debris and dancing between gravity wells. Choi-Dae fired the first missile. It crossed the void in seconds and struck the lead transport ship in its fuel tanks. The explosion was silent in the vacuum, but it was beautiful. A flower of fire blooming against the stars. The second missile hit before the first explosion faded. Then the third. Then the fourth. The convoy had no escort. Why would they? They were deep in Dominion territory, surrounded by 100,000 warships. No enemy had ever reached this far. No enemy had ever been crazy enough to try. In 12 minutes, it was over. 42 transport ships drifted as burning wreckage. Enough fuel to power 10,000 warships for a month was gone. Scattered across the void, in expanding clouds of flame, the horizon vanished again. Slipping into the shadow of an asteroid field before the Dominion could respond, Admiral Vec received the report in silence. His officers waited for orders, for anger, for something. But the old admiral just stood there, staring at the data. One ship. One tiny ship from a primitive species. It had destroyed more supplies in 12 minutes than the last 3 rebellions combined. Find them, he said again. But this time, his voice was different. There was something in it that his officers had never heard before. Something that sounded almost like fear. The hunting began. 50 warships were pulled from the invasion fleet and sent to find the horizon. They spread across the system, scanning every shadow, checking every asteroid. They were the best hunters in the Dominion. Veterans of 100 campaigns. They found nothing. On the third day, the horizon struck again. A communication relay station, far from the main fleet, suddenly went dark. When rescue ships arrived, they found only debris and a message burned into a floating piece of metal. Earth remembers. On the 5th day, fuel depot exploded. On the 7th, a weapons cache. On the 9th, a medical station that served a dozen warships. The Dominion fleet was bleeding. They could not find the knife. Admiral Vec called for reinforcements. 50 hunters became 100. Then 200. Then 500. They set traps and laid ambushes. They used every trick they knew at the Battle of Kepler's Belt. They thought they had finally caught the horizon. 500 warships surrounded an asteroid field where sensors had detected a heat signature. They moved in with overwhelming force, confident of victory. The asteroids exploded. The Horizon had spent 2 days planting mines among the rocks. The blasts tore through the fleet like fire through paper. Ships crashed into each other in the confusion. Crews panicked and made mistakes. By the time it was over, 47 Dominion warships were destroyed. The remaining 3 limped home with a message burned into their hulls: Earth remembers. On the horizon, the crew celebrated quietly. They had won again. They had survived again. But they knew the cost was coming. Ensign Omina had taken a piece of shrapnel during the ambush. It had torn through her station and buried itself in her stomach. Medic Shinwu worked for 6 hours to save her, but the damage was too great. She died holding Captain Tay's hand. "Tell my mother I was brave," she whispered, and then she was gone. Tay stood alone in the cargo bay where they kept the bodies. There were 3 now, wrapped in white sheets, waiting for a burial that might never come. 3 young people who would never see Earth again. Yuna found him there, staring at the shapes in the dark. "We cannot save everyone," she said softly. "I know." His voice was rough. "But I promised to bring them home. You promised to fight." "That is different." He looked at her. In the dim light, she could see the weight in his eyes. The weight of command. The weight of decisions that killed people you loved. "Is it worth it?" he asked. 3 dead. More coming. Are we making a difference, or are we just delaying the inevitable? Yuna thought for a long moment. Then she said, "I intercepted a Dominion communication last night. They are pulling ships from 3 other invasion fleets to hunt us." "3 fleets, Captain. 3 other worlds that will not be conquered this month because of what we are doing." Tay was silent. Mina died so that millions of beings on worlds she never knew could live free a little longer. "I think she would say that was worth it." The captain nodded slowly. He reached out and touched the white sheet covering Mina's body. "We keep fighting," he said. "For her. For all of them." The horizon moved on, deeper into enemy territory. Carrying its dead and its living toward whatever came next, the Dominion was breaking, not in battle, not in fire, but in the quiet spaces between, in the whispers that spread from ship to ship, in the fear that grew like mold in dark corners. Soldiers who had never questioned orders began to hesitate. Crews who had always been eager for combat found reasons to delay. And everywhere the same story was told: the human ship, the ghost, the thing that could not be killed. On the slave worlds, the conquered species heard the rumors too. They heard about the single vessel that had defied the greatest empire in history. They heard about the messages burned into Dominion hulls. Earth remembers, and they began to remember too. Emperor Torak sat alone in his throne room and felt his empire trembling. He had conquered 17 civilizations. He had ruled for 300 years. He had never imagined that a species of primitives could make him feel afraid. But he was afraid now. The human ship had destroyed 200 vessels. It had crippled supply lines across 3 sectors. It had turned the largest military force in galactic history into a mob of frightened children jumping at shadows. And the worst part was this: still could not find it aboard the horizon. Captain Tay gathered his surviving officers in the small conference room behind the bridge. There were gaps at the table now, empty chairs where friends had sat before the war began. "Report," he said. Lieutenant Yuna pulled up the latest intelligence. "Dominion morale is collapsing. We intercepted messages from 6 different commanders requesting transfers away from the front. 2 of them were admirals." Chief Engineer Beek Su added his own news. "Their fleet movements have become erratic. They are pulling ships from invasion duties to hunt us. That means fewer attacks on other worlds." "How many fewer?" 7 civilizations that were scheduled for conquest this month are now untouched. The Dominion simply does not have the resources to hunt us and keep expanding at the same time. Tay felt something warm in his chest. It was not quite happiness. Too many of his people were dead for that. But it was something like hope. "We are making a difference," he said quietly. Dr. Yunhana nodded. "More than you know. The Dominion's psychology is built on the idea that resistance is pointless. Every species they have conquered believed that. They surrendered because they thought fighting would only make things worse." She pulled up a chart showing Dominion communications over the past month, but now the conquered species are seeing something different. They are seeing that one ship from one small world can make the greatest empire in history bleed. They are starting to ask themselves, what if we had fought too? The question hung in the air. It was a dangerous question. The kind of question that started rebellions. What about us? Tay asked. How long can we keep this up? The answer came from Navigator Lee Ho. His voice was tired but steady. The ship is holding together. Barely. We have lost 16 crew members. Our ammunition is at 40%. Our fuel is at 35%. Can we get more? We could try to raid another Dominion depot, but they have increased security at all major facilities. It would be risky. Tay looked around the table. He saw exhaustion on every face. These people had been fighting for 2 months without rest, without reinforcement, without any hope of rescue. They had given everything they had, and they were still willing to give more. We keep going, he said. As long as we can move, we fight. No one argued. No one complained. They simply nodded and returned to their stations. The next week brought new challenges. The Dominion had changed its tactics. Instead of hunting the horizon directly, they began setting traps. False targets designed to lure the human ship into ambush. Decoy convoys protected by hidden warships. Jin spotted the first trap just in time. His instincts, honed by years of racing through dangerous spaces, screamed at him to change course. He did, and the missiles meant for the horizon sailed past into empty space. That was close, Yuna said. Too close. Jin's hands were shaking. They are learning. They were. The Dominion was adapting slowly and clumsily, but adapting. They were starting to think like humans. Starting to use tricks and deception instead of pure force. It was not enough. Not yet, but it was a warning. Medic Shinwu worked without sleep. There were always injuries now. Burns from overloaded systems. Broken bones from emergency maneuvers. The stress of constant combat wearing bodies down to nothing. He found Captain Tay in the medical bay late one night. Sitting alone with a bandaged hand. You should rest, Wu said. I should do many things. Tay's voice was distant. I should save my crew. I should win this war. I should take everyone home. You are doing what you can, am I? Tay looked at him. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. Sometimes I wonder if we are just delaying the inevitable. The Dominion is vast. We are one ship. Eventually, they will find us. Eventually, our luck will run out. Wu sat down beside him. Do you know why I joined this mission? No. Because I spent my life patching up people who had been hurt by forces beyond their control. Earthquakes, fires, wars. They did not start. And I always felt helpless. I could heal bodies, but I could not stop the things that broke them. He paused. This mission gave me a chance to do something different. To stand against the thing that wants to hurt us. Maybe we will lose. Maybe we will all die. But at least we are fighting. At least we are not waiting helplessly for the end. Tay was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Thank you. For what? For reminding me why we are here. The next morning, Yuna brought news that changed everything. She burst onto the bridge with data tablets in both hands and excitement in her eyes. Captain, you need to see this. She pulled up a recording, intercepted from a Dominion military channel. It showed a Velen officer reporting to his superiors, and his voice was trembling. The 32nd Fleet has been reassigned to hunt the human vessel, the officer said. But sir, the crews are refusing deployment. They say they would rather face execution than face the ghost ship. Tay stared at the screen. They are refusing orders? Not just them. Yuna pulled up more recordings. 12 fleets have reported similar problems. Soldiers are deserting. Officers are resigning. The Dominion is tearing itself apart trying to find us, and the stress is destroying their military from the inside. Chief Engineer Su let out a low whistle. We are not just hurting them. We are making them hurt themselves. That was always the plan, Dr. Hannah said quietly. They built their empire on fear and inevitability. We are showing everyone that they can be beaten. And that knowledge is more dangerous than any weapon. Tay stood at the center of his bridge and felt the weight of the moment. They were winning. Not in the way that wars were usually won, with decisive battles and clear victories. They were winning by surviving, by refusing to break, by being the rock that the wave crashed against again and again. "Send a message to Earth," he said. "Tell them the Dominion is cracking. Tell them we are still here. Tell them to hold on." The message went out across the void, a tiny signal traveling impossibly far to reach a small blue world. And on that world, billions of people heard the news and felt something they had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope Emperor Torak made his decision on a cold morning in the throne room. He had spent weeks watching his empire crumble from the inside. He had seen admirals beg for transfers. He had heard reports of soldiers weeping at the thought of facing the human ship. He had felt his power slipping away like sand through his fingers. No more. He summoned his personal fleet. 2,000 of the finest warships in the Dominion. Veterans of 100 conquests. The best crews, the best weapons, the best commanders. They had been held in reserve for emergencies, for threats that truly mattered. This was such a threat. "Find the human ship," Torak commanded. "Destroy it. Bring me proof of its death, or do not return at all." The fleet departed within hours. 2,000 ships, moving in perfect formation, heading toward the edge of Earth's solar system. They would end this nightmare. They would crush the ghost that had haunted their empire. They would restore the fear that was the foundation of Dominion power. Aboard the Horizon, Captain Tay received the news with something like relief. Luthon's ship's Lieutenant Yuna reported, "The Emperor's personal fleet? They are heading straight for us." "No more hiding," Tay said. "No more hit and run. This is the final battle." He'd known it would come eventually. The Horizon was running on scraps. Fuel nearly gone. Ammunition nearly spent. Half the systems held together with emergency repairs and desperate prayers. They had been fighting for 3 months and they had nothing left to give. Nothing except everything. Tay gathered the crew in the cargo bay. All 163 survivors stood together, looking up at their captain. They were thin and tired and scared, but they were still there. "Still standing? I will not lie to you," Tay said. "This is probably the end. 2,000 warships against one. We cannot run. We cannot hide. All we can do is fight." He paused, looking at each face in turn. He saw Navigator Liho, whose grandfather had survived the jungle. He saw Chief Engineer Beek Su, whose mother had rebuilt her life from nothing. He saw Weapons Officer Choi Dae, carrying 3 generations of military honor. He saw Medik Shin Woo, who had spent his life saving others. He saw Lieutenant Kim Yuna, who had never known defeat because she had never stopped trying. He saw humans, his people, his family. "The Dominion thinks they are coming to destroy us," Tay continued. "They are wrong. They are coming to witness something they have never seen before. A species that would rather burn than bow. A crew that would rather die standing than live on their knees." His voice grew stronger. "We have already won. We have shown the galaxy that the mighty can be challenged. We have inspired rebellions on a dozen worlds. We have given hope to billions of beings who thought hope was dead." He raised his fist. "Today, we write the final chapter. Today we make them remember Earth forever." The crew raised their fists in answer. Their voices echoed through the cargo bay, a roar of defiance that seemed to shake the stars. Themselves, the Horizon moved to meet its fate. They chose their battleground carefully. The edge of Earth's solar system, where the distant sun was just another star among millions. They wanted to fight here within sight of home, where the ghost of Earth could watch their final stand. The Dominion fleet arrived in perfect formation. 2,000 ships arranged in layers, each one bristling with weapons, each one crewed by veterans who had never known defeat. Admiral Vec commanded from the flagship. He had been given strict orders: total destruction, no prisoners, no mercy. The human ship must die, and everyone aboard it must die. The galaxy must see that resistance was futile. Tay opened a channel. His face appeared on every Dominion screen. One last message before the end. "You have conquered species who believed surrender was wisdom," he said. You have never met a people who would rather burn than bow. We are not your subjects. We are not your conquest. We are the wall you will break against." Admiral Vec laughed. "You are one ship. We are 2,000. Your defiance is meaningless. Then come and take us." The channel closed. The battle began. The horizon flew like it had never flown before. Jin pushed the engines past every safety limit, past every warning, past every boundary of what the ship was supposed to do. They danced between warships so close their hulls almost touched. They used the enemy's own formations against them. Slipping through gaps and letting pursuers crash into each other, they fired every weapon they had. Missiles and lasers and emergency explosives they had built from spare parts. He hit fuel tanks and bridge towers and engine cores. He watched Dominion ships explode and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The enemy fired back. Thousands of weapons, all aimed at one small target. The horizon shook with impacts. Hull breaches opened and were sealed. Systems failed and were rerouted. The ship screamed with stress and kept flying. Lieutenant Yuna coordinated the chaos, tracking every enemy movement, finding every weakness. Her voice never wavered. Even when fire burst through the wall behind her station, Chief Engineer Sue held the ship together through pure will. Sparks flew and pipes burst and alarms screamed. But he kept the engines running, kept the lights on, kept the horizon alive. Manik Wu moved through the chaos, treating wounds, dragging injured crew members to safety, doing everything a human body could do and more. And Captain Tay stood at the center of it all, giving orders, making decisions, watching his people die and his ship burn and his enemy fall. 9 hours. The battle lasted 9 hours. When it finally ended, the horizon was dead. Its engines were gone, its weapons were empty, its hull was torn open in 100 places. It drifted among the wreckage like a broken bird, but it was not alone in death. Of 2,000 Dominion ships, fewer than 300 remained. The rest were debris scattered across the void in a field of fire and metal. Admiral Vec was dead. Half the Dominion's greatest commanders were dead. The Emperor's personal fleet, pride of the Empire, was destroyed by one ship. One tiny ship from a primitive world, Captain Tay, died in his chair, a smile on his face. Lieutenant Yuna died at her station, data still scrolling across her screen. Navigator Ho died at the controls, hands still on the wheel. Engineer Sue died in his engine room, surrounded by the machines he loved. Medic Wu died helping others, as he had always done. They all died. Every soul aboard the horizon gave their life in fire and fury. But their death was not the end. It was a beginning. Across the galaxy, the conquered species heard the news. The Emperor's personal fleet destroyed by a single human ship, the mighty Dominion. Humbled by primitives who refused to kneel, the rebellions began within a week. On 17 worlds, slaves rose against their masters. They had been told resistance was futile. They had seen proof that it was not. They had seen the horizon, and they had learned what one ship could do. The Velen Dominion, built on the myth of inevitability, collapsed in on itself. Without fear, they had nothing. Without the certainty of victory, their soldiers would not fight. Without the belief that resistance was pointless, their slaves would not obey in 3 months. The empire that had ruled for 10,000 years crumbled to dust. A century later, a delegation from the Galactic Coalition arrived at Earth. They came from 100 free worlds. Species that had been slaves until the horizon showed them a different way. They came to honor the planet that had done what no one else could do. Admiral Parknari met them at the memorial. She was the great-granddaughter of Captain Tay, and she wore his medal on her chest. Behind her stood a monument of white stone, carved with the names of every soul who had served on the horizon. "Your ancestors saved billions," the Coalition ambassador said. "How can we ever repay such a debt?" Nari looked up at the stars. She thought about her great-grandfather, who had flown into impossible odds with a smile on his face. She thought about his crew, who had followed him into fire because they believed in something bigger than survival. "Remember what they taught you," she said, Empires fall. Tyrants die. The powerful crumble and the cruel are forgotten. But the ones who refuse to kneel? The ones who stand against the darkness no matter the cost? She touched the stone, warm beneath her fingers. They become eternal. Above her, the stars burned bright. And somewhere out there, in the endless void, the memory of the horizon flew on forever, because some things cannot be destroyed. Not by time, not by death, not by the mightiest empire in the galaxy. Some things are simply too human to die. The end.